Over the summer months from June to August in 1991, something terrifying struck the small, peaceful farming community of Vineyard, Utah. What 5 friends, Corbin, Chad, Dennis, Holly, and Tanya, aged 12 to 13, told their parents was dismissed as nonsense. That is, until it happened again in the summer of '92, this time taking a horrific turn. 7 years later, Corbin finally told the entire story of what happened during those 2 summers. His friends gave the same account. This is his story. "I'll never go near or set foot in a cornfield again. We'd been playing in the cornfields ever since all of us were in kindergarten, and nothing ever happened. Everything started to go wrong in the summer of '91 and went horribly wrong in '92. We'd had an early spring in '91, so the farmers were able to plant the field sooner than usual. When summer hit, we were always outside exploring the area, catching frogs and snakes, building forts, and just having fun. One thing we'd always do, though, as soon as it grew high enough, was run and play in the cornfields that surrounded us. The farmer next door to me would always get angry if he caught us in his corn, so part of the fun was hiding from him as he made his rounds watering the fields. I don't remember the exact day, but I think it was the 1st or 2nd week of June. I started having the same nightmare every night for a week straight. I and my friends were running through a field of corn with looks of terror on our faces. Then, suddenly, we were standing in a circle with our heads down, holding hands. I'd then wake up sweating. I always had weird dreams, but this one shook me to my core, and I'd wake up feeling empty inside the rest of the day. After the nightmare stopped, I forgot about it and went about playing and enjoying the summer as usual. It wasn't until the beginning of July that it started. We'd always meet up at the big tree behind my house after breakfast and then head out for our daily adventure. That morning, as we were walking and talking, deciding what sort of trouble or fun we'd like to get into, Holly mentioned the corn was tall enough we could start playing in it. She'd also seen Kay, the farmer, headed down that way on the old dirt bike he always rode, most likely to water the field, which added to the excitement. We all laughingly agreed as we made our way down the dirt road to the cornfield. As we came to the field we liked to play in, we giggled as we saw Kay's dirt bike down the road a bit, so we knew he wasn't far. We whispered to each other, it'd be fun to see if we could find him somewhere in the field first without him seeing us. As we jumped the ditch and stepped into the field, we gave each other strange looks. It was unlike any look I'd ever seen from my friends. None of us said anything as Tanya started walking into the corn, with the rest of us following single file, with me bringing up the rear. We'd walked for a while before Tanya suddenly stopped, making me run into the back of Chad, almost sending him to the ground. "Hey, why'd you stop?" asked Chad. "There's something up here," replied Tanya in an almost worried tone. "What do you mean?" asked Dennis loudly. "Quiet. We don't need the old man knowing we're in here yet," I whispered just loud enough for him to hear. Curiosity got the better of me, so I moved to the next row of corn and walked up to where Tanya was standing. I was confused by what I saw there. Neatly laid out, one in each row of corn, were 5 shiny black boxes with red silk ribbons wrapped around them. I walked up to the one closest to me, as did the others, and we all looked like we'd seen a ghost or something. Then, as if in unison, we knelt down in front of a box, grabbed the end of the red ribbon and pulled on it until it slid smoothly down the side of the box. My heart was racing as I put my hands on the lid, not knowing what might be in there. I looked over at Tanya and was about to ask her what we should do when she was already lifting the lid to her box. As she gazed inside, she had this look of shock on her face that quickly turned to a grin. "Come on, what's inside?" I asked. She just looked at me as she put her hand inside the box, took out what was in there, and held it up. It was a cassette tape of a boy band she loved and had been wanting for quite some time, but didn't have the money for. "What on earth?" I thought. I then looked back at my box and quickly flipped the lid off. There inside lay the exact action figure I'd been wanting for quite some time. I reached down, picking it up as I began wondering how and why. I slowly looked over at my friends, who were taking things out of their boxes, things they'd always wanted as well, but were never able to get. As we knelt there holding the items, the boxes suddenly vanished. "What the?" I said as I fell backward in dismay, but also feeling a sense of excitement. Holly let out a slight scream as everyone else gasped. "What just happened?" "This can't be real," said Dennis, staring at the item in his hand. "What I'm holding in my hand is for sure real," responded Chad. "Hey, are you damn kids in my corn?" shouted Old Man K as we heard him coming towards us. We jumped up and began running in the opposite direction, still holding on to our gifts. We ran to the other side of the field from where we'd entered. Once there, we came to another ditch and followed it until we came to the barn where Kay stowed his hay. We then climbed the ladder, going to the top of the haystack. We then ran to the wall and peered through the holes to see where the old man was. We could see him walking through the field, heading back to his dirt bike, most likely continuing his rounds watering the fields. We breathed a sigh of relief as we turned around and sat down in a circle. We were mesmerized by the items we'd gotten from the boxes. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. All of a sudden it seemed as if everything stopped, as if the world itself stopped. The next thing I remember was standing behind my little brother in his room, watching him as he played with his toys. He was humming something as I walked up behind him and kicked him in the head, which sent him to the floor. I then picked up one of his hardcover books from the shelf and began beating him with it as I laughed hysterically. I couldn't stop myself and didn't want to. It was as if I was enjoying it. A few minutes later, my mom came running into the room, grabbed the book out of my hand and threw me against the wall. I stood there laughing as she consoled my brother, asking me why on earth I was beating him. I didn't say a word. I just continued laughing. After consoling my brother, she stood up, grabbed me by the ear, dragged me into my room, and slammed the door. I calmly went and lay down on my bed, stopped laughing, and just glared at the ceiling. When my dad got home, I got the belt across my back, something fierce. It didn't faze me though. I was silent with each hit when normally I'd be crying out. It was as if all feeling had been taken away from me. After getting my lashings, I went to sleep, gift in hand. The following morning I replayed beating my little brother in my mind but felt indifferent about it all. I could only think about the cornfield and the gift as I held it tightly. I longed to be back in the field. When I walked into the kitchen to eat, my mom looked at me fiercely and said, "What got into you yesterday? Why would you do such a thing to your little brother? Don't ever do that again." I simply shrugged my shoulders, then sat down and ate breakfast. After eating, I jumped up and ran outside to meet my friends at the big tree. They were all there waiting for me, gift in hand, like me. We simply stared at each other until Chad spoke, saying, "After sitting down on the haystack yesterday, I woke up in my younger sister's room and was beating her with her baton." Right then, everyone's expressions turned to disbelief. "Me too," I hesitantly responded. Everyone else nodded their heads, acknowledging they had as well, as all of us had younger siblings. "Let's go to the cornfield," Tanya said with a grin as she turned, putting on the headphones to her Walkman. We then followed her single file towards the field. I couldn't stop staring at the gift as we walked. I looked behind me to see my friends' faces glued to theirs. Once we made it to the field, we entered from the same spot we had the day before. We walked until we came to where we'd found the black boxes. Our footprints and impressions from the boxes were still there. We quietly sat down in a circle, and I started having the most disturbing visuals in my mind. Instead of beating my brother, I tied him up in the kitchen and was torturing him by getting a butter knife red hot on the stove and then putting it on different parts of his body. I smiled as he shrieked out in pain, begging me to stop, but I would not. This went on for weeks. Every morning we'd head to the field, sit in a circle, and have the same sadistic thoughts. Sometime later, as we were sitting in the field, the black boxes suddenly appeared again in front of us. We set down our gifts and lifted the lids. To our delight, there was another item inside the box, but this one was much better, something else that was hard for us to get our hands on. I do remember lifting it out of the box, holding it up and smiling. Like before, the world seemed to stop, and without warning, I was standing in the kitchen, looking down at my little brother, who was tied up. He was screaming and pleading with me to stop. My right hand was holding a butter knife on the stove's red-hot rings as I kept him held down with my left foot. When the knife got too hot for me to hold, I slowly took it off the stove and moved it down to his ear. His screams almost deafened me as I held the knife on him. I can still smell his burning flesh in my nose to this day. I put the knife back on the rings to heat it up again. My mum, who'd been out grocery shopping, came barging into the room, pushing me away from my brother with such force it caved in the sheetrock behind me. I was emotionless as she kneeled down next to him. Right then, both my sisters came into the kitchen and screamed when they saw my brother covered in burn marks, sobbing on the floor. "Call 911 now!" my mom yelled out to them. My oldest sister ran over to the phone and called the police. "Why? Why? Why?" My mom screamed at me as my sisters looked on in shock, staring at me like I was a monster. 10 minutes later, the police and an ambulance showed up at my house. I'll never forget the look of disgust my mom gave me as the police took me away. I spent a few days at the juvenile detention center in Provo and then was sent to a youth camp in southern Utah. I came back home in late September and seemed to be mostly back to my old self. At least, that's what the doctors told my family. We told them everything that had happened, but no one believed us. It's hard to remember now what I thought and felt during that time away from home. To be honest, it was a blur. The only things I thought about were the gifts and wanting to be back in the cornfield. When I went back to school, it was only then I found out my friends had done the same exact thing to their siblings. They'd kept us separated on purpose and had sent us to different youth programs throughout the state. The first time we met back up was at school during lunch. It was Holly who spoke first, asking, "Do you guys know where your gifts are?" Everyone shook their heads no. As I thought to myself, I turned my entire house inside out when I came back and couldn't find them anywhere. Over the next 9 months, things went back to being fairly normal, other than none of us could stop thinking about the gifts and the cornfield. It became an obsession. It seemed to be all we talked about when we were together. When school let out in June of '92, we went about our summer as usual. It wasn't until July that our lives would forever change. I was lying in bed sleeping one night when I heard someone whispering my name into my ear. "Corbin." I immediately sat up in bed asking, "Who's there?" My bed wasn't too far from the window, and I had a feeling I should look outside. To my surprise, there were my friends standing on the grass, staring at me. I still wonder who whispered my name. It couldn't have been my friends, as my window was shut. I then moved over to the window, slowly sliding it open part way, and asked, "What are you guys doing?" "We're going to the cornfield. It told us it's ready for us," replied Tanya. A feeling of exhilaration overcame me at the thought of what awaited us. I slid the window open the rest of the way, took the screen out, and carefully climbed down to the grass to join my friends. I quickly grabbed my shoes off the back porch and then took off running down the dirt road as the moon lit our way. As we ran, we laughed and talked with anticipation. Once we reached the field, none of us hesitated as we jumped the ditch and then continued running. As I passed the first cornstalk, an extreme sense of comfort overcame me. It felt like seeing an old friend I hadn't seen in years. After running a ways, Dennis, who was in front, suddenly stopped, looked over his shoulder and grinned. There in front of us were 5 black boxes. Part of the boxes glistened as the moonlight shined on them through cracks in the corn. We wasted no time in kneeling down and opening them. A sense of euphoria overtook me as I reached down and grabbed my gift. I held it up for my friends to see how much better it was than the last ones, as they did the same. Then, as usual, we formed a circle as we smiled and laughed at what we had just received. The next thing I remember was being jolted out of a trance at the sounds of squealing piercing my ears. I looked down at my hands, which were holding a pitchfork, then noticed my friends around me holding other sharp farming tools. They were covered in blood, as was I. In the center of us was a bleeding pig that was still breathing. We'd been repeatedly stabbing it. I could see its blood pumping out of the wounds that littered its body. We then dropped the tools, climbed the pen's fence, and went home. When I got home, I took a shower in the basement so I wouldn't wake anyone, then went to my room, put the screen back in, and closed the window. When I got into bed, I was surprised to see the new gift lying on my pillow. I held it tightly as I quickly fell asleep. The following day, I was awakened to someone yelling and banging on our back door. A minute later, I could hear my dad having a heated discussion with someone. When I heard the door close, my dad then came barging into my room asking, "Did you have anything to do with Kay's pig being killed last night?" He said, "It looks like it might have been the work of several people." People? No, I have no idea what you're talking about, Dad. I was in my room all night and just now woke up, I replied. That's what I thought, he said. And I told him that I better not find out it was you, or you know what's going to happen. He responded with agitation. When he left my room and closed the door, I rolled over, staring at the wall, and again felt indifferent, emotionless. All I cared about was the new gift and going back to the cornfield. Over the next month, each night we'd sneak out to the field to the same spot, and we'd sit there. It was mid-August when it happened again. We'd snuck out as usual, but when we made it to the spot this time, there were more black boxes. We were thrilled as we approached and opened them. "Wow," I said, as inside was something so unbelievable. I would have never imagined I'd ever see one with my own eyes, let alone get my hands on one. As I reached in and picked it up, I heard the old man bellow out, "Hey, you damn kids! I thought I'd seen you sneaking in here at night." As he came charging towards us, instinctively, we stood up and started running toward the hay barn we usually hide in. The next thing I recall as I came to was us standing around Old Man K. He was lying on the ground, not moving, as we bludgeoned him with pieces of wood from the barn. While we tore off, we were laughing, but our laughs were morbid and dark. Everything then began to fade like when you slowly turn down the volume on a stereo. I woke up in my bed to the sound of someone loudly beating on our front door. The next thing I heard was my mother talking to someone. As her voice began to escalate, her loud footsteps shook the house as she came stomping toward my bedroom. When she opened the door, she was crying and said, "The police are here and they want to speak with you." "What did you do to Kay?" I said nothing as I jumped out of bed and went to the front door. When I got there were police holding a pair of my sneakers as they looked at the soles. "Come with us, son," said one of the officers. I was handcuffed and taken to the station, where I was questioned about what had happened to Kay. When it was all over and I went back home, I thought I'd get the beating of my life, but my parents were too heartbroken and have treated me differently since. Looking back, it's hard to describe what I felt and thought during those 2 summers, other than it was like being in a trance-like state. The items from the black boxes were not gifts. Each one came with a price, and the price was the evil we had to perform in exchange. Kay had been found by his wife, barely clinging to life, early that morning. She quickly called the police, and an ambulance was sent. His wife told the police he'd gone out late the night before to chase the kids out of his cornfield and never came back. The police were able to prove it was them by the impressions their shoes made in the dirt. When Kay recovered, and to everyone's surprise, he decided not to press charges, as long as the families moved away from the area and never returned, to which each family did by the end of that year. A month later, one of Kay's workers was harvesting the corn when he noticed something on the ground from his combine. He stopped and got out to see what it was. There, on the ground, were 5 shiny black boxes lined up in a row. He opened them, and each one had items in it. He took the boxes to the pole barn and told Kay and his wife about it, then went back to work. Later that day, when he came back to the pole barn, the boxes were gone. Years later, all of the farms and vineyards were torn down, and homes were built on the grounds. No one knows where the 5 black boxes are. Corbin said he never saw or heard from his friends again after they moved. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.